I'm smashed right now, drunk as hell, with a lot of emotions gyrating about my head. My mind space is a concoction of fear and anger. For the past 4 hours, I've drank vodka and orange juice, vodka cranberry juice, and finally vodka and grape juice. That's a load of screwdrivers, cosmopolitans, and I don't know, whatever you call vodka and grape juice. Well, maybe I'll make up my own name. The Crystal Room. Okay, that's dumb, but whatever. It's the Crystal Room that's on my mind right now. I had to drink myself sloppy just to have the courage to write down my experience. I have to get all the details straight and not stray too far from the truth. In 2001, my wife and I went to New York City. Surprisingly, I loved it, except for my final days there. A southerner in New York, I got the worst asinine advice and general characterization from my buddies at work. One was, don't stare at anybody on the subway. They don't like being stared at. Well, who the hell does? I don't want to live in a city where the people like being stared at. It's creepy, if otherwise. People are genuinely nice. I never had any issue with anyone on the subway, but then again, I didn't just sit there staring at people like they were animals in the zoo. Next to the last day of our vacation, we visited Times Square. I was intrigued by the constant action, the incessant visual and auditory stimuli. There was so much to see, so much to hear. My mind was scattered and unfocused. There was flashing lights and advertisements and constant blur of nameless faces and mindless crowds. I was enjoying it, but I was also a little overwhelmed. I asked my wife if we could go back to the hotel, but she wasn't ready to end the day. She assured me she was quite capable of taking care of herself. Just go back to the hotel. I won't be much longer. I can take care of myself. You sure? I said. I can tough it out. No, go, please. I'll be fine. So I walked to the nearest subway station and rode back to our hotel, which was at the end of the line in Flushing, Queens. When I got to our hotel, I slumped down in the bed and fell asleep. I was exhausted. I woke up around 3 a.m. The bed was empty, besides me. I picked up my cell phone and called her, but I got no answer. There was a text. Honey, meet me at the Crystal Rose Room. It's just down the street from the hotel. Time on the text was 2 a.m. I remembered the place. It stood out amongst all the other crowded storefronts with a big old neon sign of a scantily dressed woman holding a red rose. What was my wife doing at a strip club? She was a regular churchgoer, never missing and always insisting I go with her. Something didn't seem quite right. I got dressed in a hurry and went down to the club. I tried to bowl my way through, but the bouncer pushed me back, shoving his large open palm into my chest. No, sir. Only invited guests are allowed. I got a text from my wife. She's inside. What's her name? Catherine Bressler. Oh, hell yeah, Mr. Bressler. Come on in. We've been expecting you. The courteous welcome shocked me, considering that a moment before he was ready to stomp me into the ground. In a flash of a moment, I went from being a nuisance to a highly regarded guest of honor. I walked through the front door and into the past. It was an old-fashioned cabaret with the waitresses dressed in flappers, bearded dresses, and floral headbands. They were all wearing outlandish large pearl necklaces, and there was a pianist playing ragtime music with a boisterous horn assembly. The air was thick with smoke and cheap perfume. My eyes were watering, but I felt eerily comfortable, like this was where I truly belonged. On the center stage, dressed in a tight, short flapper dress, was my wife, Catherine. She was dancing as if in a trance. A man walked up on the stage and started kissing her. My wife seemed to be enjoying it a lot, and I ran up to the front of the stage. Hey, damn it, get your hands off my wife. The man stopped, turned his gaze towards me, and smiled. His mouth was full of yellow, jagged teeth, encrusted with thick layers of plaque. My wife looked at me and smiled, revealing a similar set of teeth, smaller but no less hideous. I could no longer live a lie. I want my old life back, and I know you will too, she said. Catherine, let's get out of here. This isn't funny. I don't like this. But baby, I do. Two men grabbed me and dragged me to one of the back rooms. They pointed a gun at me and shoved me into a wooden chair. They turned the lights out and walked out of the room. I tried to run and grab the doorknob before they locked it, but I was too late. I heard a mechanical whirring and a pink light overhead was turned on. I couldn't see where the light was coming from, whether it was a lamp or a fixture in the ceiling. It almost seemed mystical, coming from an unknown source. The room now looked like I was inside a diamond with a rigid crystalline structure. There were 1,000 reflections of myself, walking through the many faces of the crystal, independent of my own motion. They were alive in themselves, more than a mere reflection. One of them called out to me, "It's time to come back to your true self." I smiled with an impressive row of sharp teeth, more immaculate, more regal than what the groping stranger my wife had. My reflection stepped out of the crystal and into the plain hardwood floor, progressing slowly towards me with his hands raised, the nails of which were long and sharp. The closer he got, the paler his skin grew. He was dressed in a black suit with a colorless vest and bow tie. Atop his head was a straw boater hat. He grabbed me by the throat, and as his cold, rigid fingers touched me, I had a vision of bygone times filled with murder and debauchery. I killed and drank, lapping up the warm blood, copper-tinged blood of many hapless victims. In my past life, I was a monster, a man willing to kill anyone, constantly thirsting for blood, never satisfied. You trapped me here, but I knew Catherine would never stay away. I knew the memories would come back. The thrill and the passion of it all would well up in her soul again. I fought back, pushing him away, but he lunged back at me, grabbing my wrist and bit on the side of my hand. I could feel the pressure of his mouth tightening as he sucked in as much blood as he can. His white skin began to fill with color. I punched at his head, knocking his hat to the ground. "Damn you! That's a nice hat. Don't you fight me. I am who you are, and you are me. There's no escaping." I noticed that now there were many different people, monsters, in the crystals. They were no longer my own reflection. They all looked hideous and weak, trapped in the purgatory by my own better selves. He lunged at me, but this time he flew at me head first. I dodged him, and as he came closer to the opposite wall of the crystal room, he yelled in exasperation, holding his hands out to avoid hitting his head against the wall. His hand was engulfed by that wall, submerged up to the elbow. He was laying on his stomach. "No! Pull me out! Don't do this! Don't you want to be good again? Don't you want to be God again? The power! The power!" I knew what I had to do at that point. He'd revealed too much. I put my hands on his ass and pushed the rest of his body through the crystalline wall. He appeared on the other side of that wall, banging with his fists and pleading me to let him out. "You son of a bitch, you'll be back. You can try to deny what you are, but the thirst and hunger is always there. It might be buried deep, but it's always there. And soon you'll miss your, or should I say, our Catherine." All around the room were trapped souls, damned vampiric souls waiting for their better halves to come to their senses and embrace the darkness that was once an innate part of their existence, boldly committing to the passion of murder and gluttony. They were screeching and hollering for release. I wanted to get out of the room. Visions of who I used to be were displayed across the crystals. I remembered who I was and when I was born. It was over 100 years ago. I thirsted. I hungered. I killed and destroyed families, mostly preying on the weak. And then, there she was, Catherine, a murderer, fell in love. I couldn't kill her, even though my stomach felt empty as my hunger was uncontrollable. I bit her, but not to kill, only to bring her into my world with me, forever. She hated me for that, and then I found the rose crystal room. I wanted to give her back a normal existence. I kill her feeling guilty. We gave up the demons, but at a price. One day we would have to come back and once again don the cloak of a murderer, but this time in his service, obeying his every whim. The world needed balance, according to the proprietor of this fair saloon. It needed hunters to weed out the weak. I remember now. He was known as the Scarlet Shepherd. The door opened. "You're not quite ready, but you've had your time. I'm not erasing your memory. I'm not giving Catherine back either. You belong to me, but I don't want it until you're ready." I looked up to see a thin man in a red suit with a long black tie. He was wearing a black tweed cap and a chain with an upside-down cross. His goons grabbed me by the arms and dragged me out of the room, and in front of Catherine, there on stage with her now was a homeless man, dressed in ragged clothes and smelling like liquor. She looked at me and smiled and buried her teeth in his neck. He struggled, but her grasp was too strong. She drank him dry. He collapsed to the floor. "You made me. You love me. And I know one day you'll come back." I was thrown out onto the street, lonely and without my wife. The shadow of my former self still lives. I left New York with new and old memories. Some I'd hoped I would never discover again. I drink to forget my sins, but mostly to forget Catherine. I tell myself that I killed her years ago, that she never survived, and that I never really ever loved her. But then again, I told you in the beginning that I didn't want to stray too far from the truth. The truth is, I'd kill 1,000,000 souls to have her back again. You're still here. I thought you might be. Thanks for joining me for tonight's story. If your insatiable appetite for horror knows no bounds, might I suggest one of our playlists, or one of our previous stories in the archive? There should be one appearing at the end of the story any minute now. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If you prefer your horror a little more analog, you can always pick up one of my books. There's a link below to my latest, and it'll take you to all the great things that I've posted on Amazon. For my book lovers in the audience, I always suggest coming on down to Patreon so you can become part of my ghostly reader tier and get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. Speaking of my patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet and Lady Vengeance for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, come on down to Patreon. I have many tiers. I'm sure you'll find one that suits you best. I always recommend the Ghostly Reader tier, since you get a signed book anytime I write one on your doorstep. But I have many tiers, and again, I'm sure you'll find one to suit you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plgue, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.